These are the 7 greatest vintage watches ever built, and I'd wager you've never heard of half of them. Not the priciest, not the flashiest, but the ones that genuinely reshaped what a mechanical watch could do. Every last one of them made before the quartz era rolled in at the close of 1969. A few of these names will land the moment I say them. Others belong to men whose inventions ride on your wrist every single day, even though almost nobody remembers who they were. We'll count up from the household names toward the ones history very nearly forgot. We begin with one you already know. Back in 1926, Rolex introduced the Oyster, the first practical waterproof and dustproof wristwatch, and its secret lived in a hermetically sealed 3-piece case paired with a screw-down crown. Here is a detail most people miss though. Those earliest cases weren't round at all, they were octagonal. A sealed case is a hard thing to convince the public about, which meant Rolex needed proof out in the wild. In 1927, a British endurance swimmer named Mercedes Gleitze strapped an Oyster on for her run at the English Channel, and according to Sotheby's, her successful crossing from Cap Grisnez to Dover on the 7th of October, 1927, ran 15 hours and 15 minutes, which made her the first British woman ever to conquer that stretch of water. The movement never stopped ticking. Rolex splashed the story across a front-page advertisement in the Daily Mail, and in doing so, effectively invented the celebrity brand ambassador. That same 9-carat gold octagonal Oyster resurfaced at Sotheby's in Geneva on the 9th of November, 2025. Over 1 million Swiss francs, roughly $1.3 million. That was the estimate it carried into the room. Its caseback still reads, Miss M. Gleitze, the companion Oyster, Vindication Channel Swim. For the collectors watching, keep in mind that auction figures like that shift constantly, so always check the latest numbers before you quote them. From the sea, we head straight to the moon. The Omega Speedmaster arrived in 1957, and it wasn't conceived as a space watch at all, but as a racing chronograph, becoming the first watch to move the tachymeter scale onto the bezel instead of the dial. That small design choice would end up mattering far more than anyone imagined. NASA came calling not long after. An engineer named James Reagan put chronographs from several brands through a punishing battery of tests, and according to Omega's own archives, the Rolex quit during the humidity test when its movement simply stopped, while the Longines Wittnauer buckled in the high-temperature test as its crystal warped. Only the Speedmaster came through intact. On the 1st of March, 1965, NASA certified it flight qualified for every manned space mission. 4 years later came the moment that sealed the legend. On the 20th of July, 1969, Buzz Aldrin wore his Speedmaster across the lunar surface, the first watch ever worn on the moon, while Neil Armstrong had left his behind inside the lunar module as a backup after an electronic timer failed. 12 months on, during Apollo 13, the crew leaned on a Speedmaster to time a critical 14-second engine burn, and Omega walked away with NASA's Silver Snoopy Award for it. One piece of trivia keeps everyone honest at the dinner table. The first watch in space wasn't the Omega at all, but a Soviet Sturmansky, worn by Yuri Gagarin back in 1961. On the moon though, the Speedmaster stood entirely alone, and it is still rolling off the production line today. Our third watch is where the promise in that title really starts to bite. On the 10th of January, 1969, Zenith unveiled the El Primero, the first high-frequency, fully integrated automatic chronograph, beating at 36,000 vibrations an hour, 5 Hz, which let it measure time down to 1/10 of a second. Its name translates out of Spanish as the first. There is a catch, and it fuels one of watchmaking's oldest arguments. 1969 saw a 3-way scramble for the crown of first automatic chronograph because Zenith announced first, yet reached the market later in September, while a group that included Heuer and Breitling built a modular caliber that beat it onto the shelves. Seiko, meanwhile, got to its home market earliest of all, back in May. All three had working prototypes running at the very same time, and the debate has never truly been put to rest. Of that trio, only the El Primero survives in production, which is about the strongest practical claim to greatness anyone can make. Here is the part almost nobody knows. In 1975, as the quartz crisis tightened its grip, Zenith's American owners ordered mechanical production halted and the El Primero tooling scrapped. and a watchmaker named Charles Vermot flatly refused. In his own words, recorded in Zenith's archives, he began quietly hiding the presses away, all 150 of them, together weighing more than a ton, along with the technical plans, the cams, and the cutting tools, sealing the lot behind a wall in an attic at the LeCoultre factory over roughly 6 months. 9 years later, in 1984, that hidden cache was finally recovered. Rebuilding the tooling from scratch would have run around 7 million Swiss francs. So because one man quietly defied his bosses, the movement lived on, and from 1988, Rolex fitted it inside the automatic Daytona. Now, we travel all the way back to the man many regard as the finest watchmaker who ever lived. His name was Abraham Louis Breguet. Born in 1747, he secured the patent for the tourbillon on the 26th of June, 1801, a rotating cage that cradles the entire escapement and turns it slowly, evening out the pull of gravity on a pocket watch's accuracy. The irony here is delicious. Granted as a 10-year patent, the first tourbillons only reached paying customers around 1805 and 1806, and interest crept along so gently that Breguet never bothered to renew his protection, letting it quietly lapse. That single decision is precisely why the whole industry gets to use the tourbillon freely today. The same restless mind also gave us the Breguet overcoil balance spring and an early shock protection device he called the Parachute, and 2 centuries later, his ideas are still ticking away inside modern watches. Here is a debt most people never realize they owe. If you wear an automatic watch, that mechanism traces back to a man whose name you've almost certainly never heard. Credit for the self-winding movement usually lands squarely on Rolex, yet Rolex's celebrated 360-degree rotor didn't appear until 1931, and the very first automatic wristwatch had already been patented years earlier by a British watchmaker named John Harwood, working out on the Isle of Man. Legend says the idea struck him while he watched children playing on a seesaw. Harwood wanted to banish the winding crown altogether, keeping dust and water out for good, so he registered his concept in Bern on the 16th of October, 1923, and received Swiss patent number 106,583 on the 1st of September, 1924, a number stamped right inside the movement itself. His design ran on what was called a bumper system, a weight rocking back and forth between 2 springs. With no crown anywhere on the case, you set the time by turning the bezel. The watch debuted at the Basel Fair in 1926, and it stood as the first serially produced automatic wristwatch anyone had ever put into production. Rolex's own advertising would later tip its hat to Harwood. Still, hardly a soul ever speaks his name aloud. Our 6th entry is really a pair, 2 feats of engineering from a single house. That house is Jaeger-LeCoultre, established in 1833 up in the Vallée de Joux. First comes the Calibre 101 from 1929, still the smallest mechanical movement on Earth and still in production, packing 98 components into a body just under 15 millimeters long that tips the scale at roughly 1 gram. Queen Elizabeth II wore a watch powered by that very movement at her coronation in 1953. Then there is the Atmos, the clock that runs on air. Jean-Léon Reuter built the prototype in 1928, and inside it sits a sealed capsule of gas that swells and shrinks with the faintest shift in temperature, and that motion alone winds the mainspring. Jaeger-LeCoultre put it plainly, a variation of just 1 degree Celsius guarantees a 48-hour power reserve. The refined version landed in 1932 and remains in production to this day. My favorite number in this whole video belongs to them because it would take 60 million Atmos clocks to burn through the same energy as 1 single 15-watt light bulb. That leaves the 7th, the man who fitted the entire world onto your wrist and whose name has slipped almost completely out of memory. Louis Cottier, born in 1894 near Geneva, perfected the world time mechanism in 1931, arranging a central dial for your local hour, a rotating 24-hour ring, and a fixed disc of city names circling the edge. Nearly every world time watch built since has copied that exact layout. Vacheron Constantin commissioned the first world time pocket watch in 1932, and Patek Philippe followed with its first world time wristwatches in 1937, drawing on Cottier so heavily that he supplied roughly 380 movements to Patek alone between 1937 and 1965. There is a charming wrinkle in all this for collectors. The city names printed on those dials are frozen snapshots of their era, so a single Chinese capital might read Peking on one watch and Beijing on another, depending entirely on the year it left the bench. As Christie's specialist Keith Davis put it, if I have a 1945 world time and it says Beijing on the dial, we've got problems. The dial itself turns into a lie detector, around 2 million pounds. That is what one 2-crown Patek world timer fetched at Phillips back in 2016. There they stand, then, the 7 greatest vintage watches ever built. Look at how the list divides. The famous ones, the Oyster, the Speedmaster, the El Primero, earned their reputations honestly, yet behind them wait the names you'd never encountered before tonight. Breguet handed the tourbillon to the world by letting his patent lapse. Harwood invented the first automatic and then dissolved into the footnotes. Cottier wrapped the whole planet around a single dial, and Charles Vermot rescued a legendary movement by burying a ton of machinery in an attic. That is the real lesson tucked inside vintage watchmaking. The greatest pieces aren't always the dearest ones. They're the pieces that quietly changed everything, whether or not anyone ever bothered to remember the name of the person who built them. Wear one of these, and you are carrying far more than a watch. You are wearing their fingerprints. If something here taught you a thing you didn't already know, then you know exactly what to do, and I'll meet you in the next one.